How is the US government funding cannabis research? Let's not surprise you. Poorly. I'm Lex Pelger. I do Canna Education for CV Sciences, the makers of Plus CBD, with excellent CBD and THC products that don't come from the University of Mississippi. So these charts come from this paper, which breaks down the research by department. So between 2018 and 2020, the U.S. funded $1.5 billion for cannabis research. But the majority of that went to NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And to be fair, they do say in their charter it says drug abuse. They're not there to look for drug help, and they do not. So they were looking for the harms from cannabis as well as doing some really basic level like pharmacological research. So while we do need to look more at the harms of cannabis, that has been the majority of the funding for decades now, and a lot of it goes to NIDA. For agencies looking at the therapeutic benefits of cannabis, that includes the U.S. Department of Defense, who's looking at it for PTSD, mental health, and for traumatic brain injury, as well as in Colorado, where they're looking at it for therapeutic effects of whole plants versus purified or synthetic cannabinoids, and then the CDC is looking at cannabis regulation. So while that's all good, this whole list is mostly looking for adverse effects and for the harms of cannabis abuse. Furthermore, here's all the steps that a researcher has to go through to use cannabis in human subjects, and it's much more lengthy than it is for most other drugs out there. Additionally, up until just a few years ago, the only cannabis that was allowed to be used in human trials funded by the federal government, which is most trials, was the cannabis from the University of Mississippi monopoly, which was notoriously terrible seeds and stem cannabis like you haven't seen since the 70s. They have now opened it up to include, I think, 6 other manufacturers, so you can get cannabis that's more like what we have here in the real world. But still, even the head of NIDA, Nora Volkow, said this process is too lengthy and gets in the way of researchers actually researching this plant. Your state has to approve, your institution has to approve, the DEA needs to come in and do an inspection. And I remember Dr. Lyle Craker, who sued the DEA trying to open up the distribution of this plant so he could be someone who grows the plant as well, saying that the inspection was ridiculous. They made him put in a gigantic next level safe, and then the walls had to be reinforced with metal mesh so college kids couldn't drill through the walls, and had to be a double enforced door. And he said, this is a college campus. You can buy it anywhere. They don't want to steal it from me. But that's what you had to go through. And so then after that, the FDA has to approve, then the DEA has to approve again, and the time delays on this stuff is ridiculous. Sometimes it's 58 days to just get that first part approved. They make it so hard to study this plant. So I think the hope is, if cannabis does get moved into Schedule 3, it will be easier to do this kind of research, and it will be flowing more towards the therapeutic side and the practical applications of harm reduction.